morning, you might want to go back this afternoon because they will have completely different horses this afternoon. Now, our last horse out for you today is also one of our thoroughbreds, but you can see he's a whole lot smaller than Forgo. This is John Henry, and John Henry is very small for a thoroughbred. John is a horse that comes from very humble beginnings. He's by the stallion Old Bob Bowers, who wasn't much of a racehorse or a stallion either, and he's out of the broodmare Once Double. Now, she wasn't very successful as a broodmare because she couldn't carry most of her foals to full term. John was born March 9, 1975 at Golden Chance Farm in Paris, Kentucky, and the farm kept him there till the following January when he was consigned to the Keeneland January mix sale. Well, this isn't a very good time to try to sell a horse, and it's usually the time of year when people sell the horses they just don't think are worth feeding through the winter time. So because of his small size, his lack of pedigree, but most of all his very nasty disposition, John sold that first time for only $1,100. Well, from that time on until May of 1978, he changed owners over a half a dozen times because nobody wanted him and nobody could get along with him. Well, then in May of 1978, a New York businessman, Mr. Sam Rubin, thought it might be fun to own a racehorse. Well, Mr. Rubin didn't know anything at all about horses, and about the only thing he did understand about racing was where the valet parking was. But he really wanted this horse, and so he bought him, sight unseen, over the telephone for $25,000. Now, some of his friends who knew a whole lot more about horses than he did couldn't believe he would do such a thing. So they asked him, they said, "Sam, why on earth would you spend $25,000 for an old gelding?" And he said, "Well, why? What color is a gelding?" But in John's very first start for Mr. Rubin, he won a $25,000 claiming race over the dirt by a length and a half. His next race was on the grass or the turf, and John preferred to run on the grass, and so this time he won by 14 lengths. Well, Mr. Rubin's friends advised him to send John to the West Coast where the turf racing was more lucrative, more competitive, and raced all year long. So in late 1979, John Henry headed to California to his new trainer, Ron McAnally. Well, then in 1980, John Henry won over $900,000. In 1981, he won over $1.7 million, and he was voted Horse of the Year. Well, then in 82 and 83, he had some minor injuries, and he didn't race very much, but he still managed to win 4 races with total earnings of over $1.2 million. Well, then in 1984, as a 9-year-old, Mr. McAnally wanted to bring John Henry back, but most people were pretty skeptical of his chances of being competitive at that age. Well, he did lose his first race that year, but he went on after that to have his best year ever on the racetrack. He won 6 graded stakes, he won over $2.3 million, and again, he was voted Horse of the Year. When John retired from racing at the end of 1984, he was the richest thoroughbred in history with total earnings of over $6.5 million. Now, since then, another horse, Ali Sheba, has beaten his all-time record, but Ali Sheba is a stallion, John is a gelding, so John is still the richest thoroughbred gelding in history. He holds 7 Eclipse Awards, which is second only to Forgo's 8, and he was inducted into Racing's Hall of Fame in 1990, and at that time he was also declared Thoroughbred Horse of the Decade for the 1980s. John Henry is now 20 years old, and he stands a very small 15.1 hands tall. Ladies and gentlemen, the great, great John Henry. Are there any questions? We'd like to thank everyone for coming to our presentation here today. If you do think of questions